All right, today's video is about the history of Latin America. So make sure you have your notes out and ready to go. We're going to run through some brief history of these countries. To begin with, early Native American civilizations, of course, occupied this land going way back in history. So we have two groups I want to discuss up top, the Olmec and the Maya. Starting with the Olmec, I want to show you this map first as far as where the Olmec were living during this time period. So this is the Yucatan Peninsula up here. So they are on the isthmus that connects North and South America. A few things for you to jot down. First of all, like I said, they are in the isthmus. So they're what is today southern Mexico. The Olmec was the first civilization on this land from about 1500 BC to 300 BC. And the Olmec was interesting because each of their cities would focus on a certain activity. So for example, one city might be a farming city, and they were the ones who specialized in growing crops such as maize. While another city might be in charge of minerals, and they would be finding things like jade. A third type of city might be one that was focused on the religious component. Here they would have pyramid-shaped temples. The other important group during this time period would be the Maya. So here is a map of the Maya civilization, where I just showed you the Olmec was right about here. And now the Maya is going to expand onto that Yucatan Peninsula. So they were on that peninsula from 300 AD to 900 AD. Remember, we're talking about a timeline here, so this is going to be after the Olmec. The Maya are notorious for having built these huge stone pyramid temples. They were also quite skilled at things like astronomy, and they used their knowledge to help develop a calendar. Further, they created a number system based on the number 20 and a writing system that perhaps you've heard of before. Hieroglyphics is a form of writing that they use different signs and symbols to record the history of their kings. The Maya group is also well known because they did have a quite interesting, or quite uninteresting, you might even say, ending. They mysteriously collapsed around 900 AD, and despite pretty intensive research, historians have not yet been able to determine exactly what happened to the civilization, where they went, and what happened during their time period. Three more groups for us to discuss today. So as the Mayan civilization declined, a new group of people called the Toltecs took over what is now northern Mexico. So the Toltecs is your first one. These warriors built a city called Tula, which is close to where Mexico City is today. And they conquered that land all the way through the Yucatan Peninsula. The Toltec is well known for controlling the trade in this region during this time period. In fact, they had what's called a monopoly to trade obsidian, and they had the most powerful weapons in the area. For many years, having such great weaponry gave them advantages they needed to maintain their rule in this part of the world. Around the year 1200 AD, there's a group called the Aztec that captured Tula from the Toltecs. The capital city that they built was called Tenochtitlan. And this city is fascinating for, of course, many different reasons. This city was built on an island in a lake. It had huge temples, including one that was more than 100 feet tall. They had a very in-depth system of roads and bridges that would join the city to the mainland, allowing people to bring food and other goods to their busy markets. Their farmers also had a pretty interesting system. They used what were called floating gardens or rafts that they filled with mud. Eventually, these rafts that were filled with mud began to sink in the lake and pile up. So, over many years, these rafts then began to form fertile islands. So, they made islands out of the rafts, kind of accidentally. The third group then is the Inca group. The Incas are going to arrive during the 1400s and create a powerful civilization in what is now present day Peru. So, we're down in South America. This civilization stretches for 2,500 miles along the Andes Mountains. The Inca rulers are quite famous for their development of these irrigation systems or systems to get water to crops, for their roads and bridges that would connect the different regions together. Moving on to European conquest. This is taking place in the 1400s to 1500s. About this time, the Spanish explorers started to get pretty interested in this region of the world. So we're going to talk briefly about two men you see on the screen. On the left is Hernan Cortez, and on the right is Francisco Pizarro. Let me pull down a couple of notes here about Cortez first. It says in 1519, Hernan Cortez led the Spanish army to Mexico's Gulf Coast. With his lead, they marched to Tenochtitlan. They brought along with them guns, cannons, and horses that the enemy was not prepared for. Unfortunately, they also brought with them some unknown allies. They brought germs, and these germs brought with them diseases, things like measles and smallpox, which eventually killed the Aztec. Actually, the diseases killed more of the Aztecs than weaponry did. Within 2 years, Cortez's army was able to defeat the Aztecs and take control of this piece of land. Another explorer on the right here, like I said, is Francisco Pizarro. He was able to take control as well. He was strongly desiring the Incas' gold and silver. So in 1532, he took a small group of Spanish explorers to South America and attacked the Inca with cannons and swords. His strategy was to capture the ruler first and have him killed, and then quickly the empire collapsed along with him. Colonial Latin America is our next brief topic. Of course, we're covering lots of time within short slides today. So what you're seeing on the screen is a map that's showing you how Latin America was colonized, meaning how it was declared or governed by other countries over across the ocean. So you're seeing the small areas of Spanish control, Portuguese, French, Dutch, and British as well. Spain was the first to colonize land here, so they took control of the yellow regions on the screen. Other European countries also got a little jealous and wanted the same power and wealth, so they quickly followed. They brought with them some big changes, some things like spreading Christianity and setting up government systems. They created a system of cash crops. And they also had some problems they brought with them. The diseases, again, were an issue. They brought diseases with them when they came to colonize, and that killed many of the natives. And then they also brought slaves over from Africa, which is a whole nother set of issues that came with it. As far as independence goes, The first revolt against colonization took place in Haiti in 1804. Mexico also attempted independence multiple times, but they failed at that movement until 1821. In 1819, a man named Simon Bolivar defeated Spain for independence of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Bolivia. In 1817, there was a man named Jose de San Martin who fought Spain for Argentina and Chile. So they're trying to get this independence movement to get rights to govern their country back from the Europeans. And then together, San Martin and Bolivar both defeated Spain for the land we now know as Peru. By 1824, all European colonies in Latin America became independent. The United States and Latin America have had a long history, of course, because they're neighbors, right? So one of the large things that the two areas went through was the 1898 Spanish-American War. This war was fought over Cuba, so they were trying to see who would get that piece of land. The United States was successful in the Spanish-American War, and as a result, the United States gained the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico, as well as Cuba. We talked already about the Panama Canal, but the United States, of course, worked with the country of Panama to get its freedom from Colombia. That happened in 1903, where we helped then build the Panama Canal that opened in 1914. And then finally, in the 1930s, the United States writes the Good Neighbor Policy. And the Good Neighbor Policy is a policy where the United States promised not to send military forces into Latin America, so not to try and fight with those countries, and also gave greater respect for Latin America country rights. And finally, modern times. I know we're flying through history here, but modern times around the mid-1900s, Latin America was still borrowing lots of money from countries around the world, which then, of course, is going to lead them to debt. Their debt is going to weaken their economy, which is causing problems still today with these nations. There were some dissatisfied political and social groups that rebelled. For example, a man named Fidel Castro in Cuba created a rebellion against his government and caused him to take over and create a dictatorship in that country. We'll talk about more later. Many countries then also face what are called civil wars. They're fighting within their country. Current problems that are faced include both population growth happening quite rapidly. So many children are being born, their population is growing too fast for them to keep up. And then a final issue that they're dealing with throughout much of Latin America includes the illegal drug trade. That's it for your brief rundown of Latin America history today. If you need to, rewind, go back, fill in your notes as you go, make sure you have good stuff, or see me if you have questions.